My name is William Crawford. I am 70 years old, and I spent my entire life believing that family would always come before money. I was wrong. I built my company from nothing. When I started, I owned one old service truck, a small toolbox, and more bills than dollars in my pocket. My wife Diane believed in me when nobody else did. She worked beside me every step of the way. Together we sacrificed weekends, holidays, and countless nights just to keep our dream alive. Years later, that dream became one of the largest commercial heating and cooling companies in the state. Everything I owned had one purpose. I wanted my family to have a better life than I ever had. 3 years ago, Diane passed away. Not a single day goes by without thinking about her. Every year, on the anniversary of her passing, my son Derek and his wife Monica join me for dinner. It is our quiet tradition. At least, that is what I believed. That evening, everything changed. The restaurant was beautiful. Soft music played in the background while people laughed around us. Expensive plates covered the table, but nobody touched the food anymore. We were simply remembering Diane. I looked at my son. He was 35 years old now. A year earlier, I had stepped away from running the company and trusted him to become the new chief executive officer. I believed he was ready. I believed I had raised him the right way. I reached into my jacket and slowly placed my checkbook on the table. "I've been thinking about your mother all week," I said quietly. "She always wanted to repair the roof of our old church. They've been struggling for years. Tonight I want to donate $50,000 from my personal savings in her memory." I expected silence, maybe even a smile. Instead, Derek slammed his glass onto the table so hard that everyone in the restaurant turned toward us. "Stop wasting my money!" he shouted. For a moment, I honestly thought I had misunderstood him. "My money," he repeated, pointing his finger directly at me. "Why are you giving away money that belongs to this family?" The room became completely silent. Monica tried to calm him down, but she looked more embarrassed by the people watching than by what he had just said. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I simply looked at my son, the boy I had carried on my shoulders, the boy whose college tuition I paid without asking for anything in return, the man who was now looking at me like I was standing between him and something he believed already belonged to him. I quietly picked up my checkbook. I placed enough cash on the table to pay the bill. Then I walked out without saying another word. The cold air outside felt easier to breathe than the air inside that restaurant. During the drive home, I replayed his words again and again. My money. Not our company. Not our family. Not even Dad, let's talk. Just 2 words that refused to leave my mind. For the first time in my life, I wondered if I really knew my own son. The next morning, someone knocked on my front door. It was Derek. Monica stood beside him, holding an expensive gift basket and wearing a perfect smile. "Dad," Derek said, avoiding my eyes, "can we come inside? We need to apologize." Every instinct told me to close the door, but after building a business for decades, I learned one important lesson. Sometimes people reveal the truth only after you let them speak. I stepped aside and invited them in. I had no idea that the conversation about to happen would reveal the first piece of a plan that had already started behind my back. And before this day was over, I would realize that losing my son's respect was only the beginning of everything they were about to take from me. Part 2. I led Derek and Monica into the living room, the same room where Diane used to read every evening. Nothing had changed since she passed away. Her favorite chair was still by the window. Her family photos were still on the shelves. Walking into that room always reminded me why I had worked so hard for so many years. Derek sat on the edge of the couch. He looked tired, but something felt strange. It wasn't guilt. It looked more like someone trying to remember a speech. "Dad," he finally said, "I'm sorry about last night." I stayed silent. I was under a lot of pressure. Running the company isn't easy. Everything happened so fast, I lost control. Still, I said nothing. He looked at Monica. She immediately took over. "William, she said with a gentle smile. "Derek loves you. We both do. Last night was just stress." Her voice was calm, too calm. Then she changed the subject. "We've been worried about you." That sentence immediately caught my attention. "Worried?" I asked. She nodded. "You've been living alone since Diane passed away. You're making emotional decisions. There are so many stories about older people losing money to scammers. We only want to protect you." Protect me. Interesting choice of words. She continued speaking before I could answer. "Last week we met with financial advisors. They suggested creating a family trust. It would protect your savings, your property, and everything you've worked for." Derek quickly nodded. "It doesn't change anything, Dad. It's just paperwork." Paperwork. After spending decades in business, I had learned one simple rule. Whenever someone says, "It's just paperwork," it usually isn't. I looked directly at Derek. "When were you planning to tell me?" He hesitated. "We wanted to surprise you." A financial document worth millions was supposed to be a surprise. Nothing about that sounded normal. Monica leaned forward. "We're only thinking about your future." I noticed something else. Neither of them had mentioned Diane again. They came to apologize for ruining the memorial dinner, yet somehow the conversation had become entirely about my money. After another few minutes, they stood up to leave. Before walking out, Derek hugged me. His hug felt empty, almost forced. "Love you, Dad," he said. I watched them drive away. The moment their car disappeared, every alarm inside my head started going off. Something wasn't right. I couldn't prove it, but I knew one thing. They hadn't come to apologize. They had come to see whether I believed their story. Later that afternoon, I decided to clear my mind. I drove my old pickup truck across town to a mechanic I had trusted for years. Arthur greeted me with his usual smile. "Good to see you, William." We talked while he changed the oil and checked the truck before winter. For almost an hour, everything felt normal again. No business, no lawyers, no family drama, just two men talking about engines. When the work was finished, Arthur printed the bill. I reached into my wallet and handed him my black bank card. He inserted it into the payment machine. A second later, it beeped. "Declined." Arthur looked embarrassed. "Probably a mistake." He tried again. Another beep. "Declined." I frowned. "Try one more time." The machine gave exactly the same answer. Arthur slowly handed the card back. "I'm sorry." I forced a smile. "It must be the bank." I stepped outside into the cold air and immediately called my private banker. Richard had managed my accounts for years. Usually he answered almost immediately. This time it took much longer. When he finally picked up, his voice sounded nervous. "William." "My card was declined," I said. "Can you remove the security block?" Silence. Long silence. Finally he spoke. "I can't." "What do you mean you can't?" "I'm no longer authorized to give you access." I felt my heartbeat slow. "What are you talking about? Those are my accounts." Another pause. Then Richard lowered his voice. "This morning your son arrived with several attorneys." My stomach tightened. "They presented a court order." I didn't say a word. "According to the documents, a temporary conservatorship has been approved." I stared across the empty parking lot. The world suddenly felt very quiet. "What does that mean?" "It means," Richard answered carefully, "that someone else now has legal authority over your financial decisions." My grip tightened around the phone. "Who?" I already knew the answer, but I needed to hear him say it. Richard took a deep breath. "Your son." The line went silent again. Yesterday, Derek had screamed that I was wasting his money. Today, he had somehow gained control over mine. At that moment, I realized the dinner had never been about the donation. It had been the first move in a game that had started long before I even knew I was playing. And if they had managed to take my bank accounts, what else had they already taken? Part 3. I ended the call and stood in the parking lot without moving. The cold wind didn't matter anymore. For the first time in my life, I couldn't access my own money. Arthur walked outside. "Everything okay, William?" I forced a smile. "It will be." I paid him in cash that I happened to have in my wallet, thanked him, and drove away. But instead of going home, I drove straight to the company headquarters. For almost 40 years, I had walked through those front doors with my head held high. Every brick in that building reminded me of the sacrifices Diane and I had made. Today, I wasn't sure what I would find. The building looked exactly the same. Employees hurried inside carrying coffee. Service trucks came and went. Business looked normal. Only I knew something wasn't. I walked toward the executive entrance and held my founder's access card against the security scanner. A red light flashed. Access denied. I frowned. I tried again. Another red light. Access denied. For several seconds, I simply stared at the screen. That badge had never failed before. It opened every door in the building. It was created specifically for me. Someone had removed my access. Someone with enough authority to erase the company's founder from its own system. I stepped away before anyone noticed. Getting angry wouldn't help. I needed answers. I waited in the lobby, watching employees come and go. A few minutes later, a young intern struggled through the security gate while carrying several heavy boxes and coffee cups. As the gate opened, I calmly walked behind him. He looked surprised. "I forgot my badge upstairs," I said with complete confidence. He immediately believed me. A few seconds later, I was inside. Nothing had changed on the executive floor. The same hallway, the same offices, the same photographs celebrating projects I had personally completed. But something felt different. This floor no longer belonged to me. I quietly walked toward the finance department. Before reaching the office, I noticed the door was slightly open. Inside sat Monica. She wasn't answering phones. She wasn't waiting for Derek. She was sitting behind one of the senior executive desks as if she worked there. Large folders covered the desk. She calmly signed document after document. I couldn't read every page from where I stood, but I recognized enough. Property transfer forms, warehouse documents, real estate files. Some carried my company's official logo. Others required executive approval. Monica had never worked for the company. She had no position, no authority, no business making decisions involving company property. Yet she looked completely comfortable, almost confident. A man in a suit entered the office carrying another folder. She signed more papers without asking a single question. He thanked her and walked away. Nobody looked surprised. That meant this had been happening for a while. I quietly stepped back before anyone saw me. There was no point confronting her. If I walked in now, she would simply deny everything. I needed proof. Real proof. Not guesses, not feelings. Facts. I left the building the same way I had entered. Once inside my truck, I sat there for several minutes thinking. The dinner, the fake apology, the family trust, my frozen bank accounts, my blocked security badge, Monica signing company documents. These weren't random events. They were connected. Someone had planned every step. I reached for my phone. There was only one person I trusted enough to call. Rick Dalton. For more than 30 years, Rick had been my attorney. He wasn't the kind of lawyer who enjoyed attention. He preferred facts over speeches. When he answered, I got straight to the point. "Rick." "William, I need your help." His voice immediately became serious. "What happened?" "I think my son is stealing everything I've spent my life building." There was silence. Finally, he spoke. "Can you meet me?" "Right now." An hour later, we sat in the corner booth of a small roadside diner. I told him everything. The restaurant, the argument, the bank, the court order, the blocked access card, Monica signing documents inside my company. Rick listened without interrupting once. When I finished, he slowly folded his hands. Then he looked directly into my eyes. "I hope I'm wrong," he said quietly. "But if even half of what you've told me is true," he paused, "this isn't about family anymore. It's a takeover." I felt something sink inside my chest. Until that moment, I still wanted to believe there had been some misunderstanding. After hearing those words, that hope disappeared. Rick opened his laptop. "I think it's time we find out exactly what they've been hiding." Neither of us knew that within the next few minutes, one document would reveal a betrayal even bigger than frozen bank accounts or stolen authority. It would prove that I no longer legally owned the one place I had always believed was still mine. Part 4. Rick didn't waste a second. He opened his laptop and began searching through public records, court filings, and corporate documents. The diner was quiet. Neither of us spoke. The only sound was the keyboard clicking faster and faster. After several minutes, Rick suddenly stopped typing. His face changed. He slowly turned the screen toward me. "William," he said, "you need to see this." At the top of the document was the address of my house. The house Diane and I bought more than 20 years ago. The house where we raised Derek. The house I had completely paid off years earlier. I looked at the ownership section. My name wasn't there. Instead, it listed 2 new owners, Derek Crawford, Monica Crawford. For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. That has to be a mistake. Rick shook his head. It isn't. He scrolled farther down. There it was, a transfer document, a signature, supposedly mine. I looked at it again. It was close enough to fool anyone. But I knew immediately. I had never signed that paper. Someone had copied my signature. Someone had transferred my home without my permission. I leaned back in my chair. Everything suddenly made sense. The family trust, the fake concern, the frozen accounts. None of it was designed to protect me. It was designed to remove me. Rick closed the document. "William, you can't go back there." "What?" "If Derek calls the police today, those records say the house belongs to him." I stared at him. "You could actually be treated as someone who has no legal right to be inside." The words hit harder than anything else that day. My own home, the place where every family Christmas had happened, where Diane had planted flowers every spring, where every photo album was still sitting on the shelves. According to the paperwork, it wasn't mine anymore. I looked out the diner window. For the first time in decades, I had nowhere that truly belonged to me. Rick broke the silence. "This is much bigger than we thought." He opened another document. "We need to find out what they're doing with the company." He searched through business records, property transfers, financial filings, corporate registrations. The deeper he searched, the quieter he became. Finally, he looked up. "They've been moving assets." "What kind of assets?" "Buildings." He clicked another file. "Warehouses." Another. "Company property." Another. "Equipment." I felt my stomach tighten. "They're selling everything." Rick nodded. "And they're moving very quickly." "Why?" "Because people only move this fast when they're trying to finish before someone notices." Neither of us needed to say who that someone was. It was me. Rick leaned back. "We need proof." "I know." "Not suspicion." "I know." "Real evidence." I thought for a moment. Then I remembered something Derek had completely forgotten. When we built company headquarters decades earlier, we installed a backup server room beneath the building. Before cloud storage existed, every important file was stored there. Years later, we upgraded the systems, but I refused to remove the original network. I insisted it stay connected as an emergency backup. Almost nobody still remembered it existed, except me. I slowly smiled for the first time in days. Rick noticed immediately. "What?" "I think I know how to find everything." That same night, after the city became quiet, I parked several blocks away from company headquarters. The lights inside the building were almost completely off. Only security lights remained. I wasn't planning to walk through the front entrance. I knew another way. Years earlier, during construction, I had insisted on building an underground maintenance tunnel connecting the utility systems. Hardly anyone had ever used it. Most employees didn't even know it existed. I grabbed a flashlight from my truck and quietly walked toward the back of the property. Hidden behind old equipment was the metal access cover, exactly where I remembered. I lifted it. The tunnel was cold, silent, and covered in dust. Every step reminded me that I knew this building better than anyone alive. After several minutes, I reached the secure basement. The old server room was still there. The equipment looked outdated, but the machines were running. I placed my hand on the biometric scanner. For 3 long seconds, nothing happened. Then, a green light appeared. Access granted. The heavy door slowly unlocked. I stepped inside. Rows of servers filled the room. Somewhere inside those machines was the truth. Every transfer, every payment, every hidden document. If Derek had been stealing from the company, this room would prove it. I connected an encrypted hard drive to the system. The download began. 1%, 3%, 7%. The progress bar moved painfully slowly. I looked at the screen. Thousands of files. Financial reports, contracts, private folders, company records. I had no idea that hidden among those files was evidence that would expose a secret so enormous it would destroy everything Derek had worked so hard to hide. Part 5. The progress bar moved slowly across the screen. 10%, 20%, 30%. Every second felt longer than the last. The basement was completely silent except for the sound of cooling fans inside the old servers. I kept watching the monitor. If anyone entered the building now, I would have almost no time to react. Finally, the download reached 100%. I disconnected the encrypted drive and slipped it into my inside pocket. Now, I had the files. But files alone wouldn't tell me the whole story. I needed to know why Derek had gone this far. I opened one of the financial folders. At first, everything looked normal. Payroll, invoices, equipment purchases, routine expenses. Exactly what any successful company should have. Then I noticed something strange. A payment made every single week. Always the same amount. Always sent to the same company. Apex Logistics Solutions. I frowned. I had never heard that name before. That was impossible. I knew every major supplier we had worked with during the last 30 years. I searched the company's records. Nothing. No contracts, no delivery history, no equipment purchases, only outgoing payments, every single week. I opened another report, then another. The same company appeared again and again. I searched further, another unfamiliar business, then another. 5 different companies. None of them had ever done real work for Crawford Commercial. Yet every month they received large transfers from our accounts. I checked their registration records, one by one. Every company had been created within the last year. Every company used the same registration service. Every company listed fake office addresses. My heart started beating faster. These weren't suppliers. They were shell companies. Money was leaving my business, millions of dollars, without anyone asking questions. I kept searching. The deeper I went, the worse everything became. Company buildings had been used as collateral. Service trucks had been listed as financial security. Warehouses had been tied to enormous loans. Everything I had spent decades building had been placed at risk. I opened another hidden folder. This one required administrator approval. To my surprise, the old founder credentials still worked. The folder opened. Inside were documents marked private. I clicked the newest file. For several seconds, I simply stared. Large transfers, foreign accounts, complex financial routes. Someone had been moving company money overseas. Not hundreds of thousands, millions. I leaned back in my chair. This wasn't careless spending. It wasn't bad management. It was deliberate. Someone had been draining the company for months, maybe longer. Then I noticed another file. It wasn't financial. It was labeled Executive Notes. Curious, I opened it. Inside were meeting schedules, private appointments, legal consultations, medical evaluations. Medical? That didn't make sense. Why would executive planning include medical documents? I opened the next folder. Most files were protected. One wasn't. It contained only a few short notes. One sentence immediately caught my attention. Friday. Final transportation confirmed. Transportation? For whom? Another note. Court paperwork complete. Another. Medical report accepted. The room suddenly felt colder. Something wasn't right. This wasn't about business anymore. I copied every document onto my encrypted drive, every file, every report, every hidden folder. If someone had created this plan, I wanted every piece of evidence before they realized I had been here. I safely disconnected the drive. Before leaving, I carefully erased every trace of my access. The system looked untouched, exactly as I had found it. I quietly closed the server room door and walked back through the underground tunnel. Outside, the night air felt freezing. I climbed into my old truck and locked the doors. For a long moment, I simply sat there holding the encrypted drive. Everything had changed. A few days earlier, I believed my biggest problem was an argument with my son. Now, I knew someone had stolen my money, my home, and possibly my entire company. But one question still remained. Why did those files mention medical reports? Who was supposed to be transported on Friday? As I started the engine, my phone rang. It was Rick. The moment I answered, I knew something was wrong. His voice was calm, too calm. "William," he said, "don't go home." My hands tightened around the steering wheel. "What happened?" "I've just found something." He paused for a second. "Whatever you think Derek is planning, it's much worse." I drove toward Rick's office without saying another word. Neither of us realized that before sunrise we would uncover the real plan. And once we did, there would be no turning back. Rick was already waiting when I arrived. The moment I walked into his office, he placed several printed documents on the desk. "I've verified everything," he said. "The financial records are real. The property transfers are real. The forged signatures are real. And the audio recording changes everything." For the first time in days, I felt something I hadn't felt since the dinner. Hope. We didn't wait another minute. Before sunrise, Rick contacted federal investigators, state financial authorities, and the court that had approved the conservatorship. Every piece of evidence was delivered at once: the encrypted files, the financial records, the forged documents, the recorded conversation, everything. By the time Derek arrived at company headquarters the next morning, he wasn't welcomed by employees. He was greeted by investigators. The executive offices were immediately secured. Every computer was taken for examination. Every financial account connected to the company was frozen before another dollar could disappear. Monica tried to leave the building. She didn't get very far. Within hours, investigators uncovered the fake companies, the hidden transfers, and the forged property documents. The truth came out much faster than either of them expected. The court immediately suspended the conservatorship after independent doctors confirmed that I was completely healthy. The fake medical reports collapsed under careful examination. The doctor who signed them admitted he had accepted money in exchange for false paperwork. One lie exposed another, then another, then another. The company board held an emergency meeting that same week. Derek was removed from every position. His authority disappeared in a single afternoon. The same employees he believed would always follow him now looked at him with disappointment instead of respect. Money had given him confidence. The truth took it away. Over the following months, the courts returned my house, my personal accounts, and control of the company. It wasn't easy. There were hearings, paperwork, and long days with lawyers. But every forged document was canceled. Every illegal transfer became evidence. Every false statement eventually caught up with the people who created it. The business survived. Not because of luck, because thousands of honest employees had spent years building it with me. They deserved better than watching someone destroy everything for greed. I also made one decision that surprised many people. I didn't return as chief executive officer. Instead, I hired experienced professionals with no family connection to lead the company. For the first time in my life, leadership was based on ability instead of blood. It turned out to be one of the best decisions I had ever made. Sometimes people ask whether I hate my son. The answer is no. Hate keeps you tied to the past. I simply accepted the truth. The son I raised and the man he became were no longer the same person. That realization hurt more than losing money ever could. Every year I still visit Diane's favorite church. The donation she dreamed about was finally made. The roof was repaired exactly as she had always hoped. Standing there, I realized something important. Money can build houses. Money can build businesses. But money can never build character. Character is revealed when nobody is watching. Derek believed he had won the moment he took my bank accounts. He believed power came from signatures, titles, and money. He couldn't have been more wrong. In the end, he lost everything because of one simple mistake. He thought he was stealing my future. In reality, he was destroying his own. If this story taught me anything, it's this. Greed doesn't ruin lives overnight. It grows quietly, one selfish decision at a time. And sooner or later, every lie reaches the day when the truth is waiting for it. That's the thing about karma. It may arrive late, but it never forgets where to knock. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more real-life inspired stories like this every week.